On paper, the Syrian Arab army was still 200,000 strong. All of Aleppo had never fallen in the first, the 2011 to 2019. They always kept control of half of it, and then with Russian assistance and Hezbollah and Iran, they took back the other half. Hama had never fallen. Deir ez-Zor had never fallen. The jihadis of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that stormed through the country actually did very little fighting, very little. The Syrian army just disappeared. It dispersed, and it was ordered by its own generals and officers and political administrators to stand down. So this was really more a regime change operation. On paper, the Syrian Arab army was still 200,000 strong. We are told, right, that at least the initial force that took over Aleppo and then moved down to Hama and Homs, at that point it was still somewhere around 30,000 or less jihadis and Islamists. And while there was a core contingent that was extremely well equipped with night vision goggles and drones and drone technology trained by the Kiev regime in Ukraine, operating, with best equipment and gear and everything, probably trained by Turkish special forces, maybe even some by Western special forces. But the majority were still, jihadis and Islamists running around firing their guns in the air in the back of pickup trucks. But there was a very strong core contingent, but still 30,000, 200,000 defending the cities, and they just disappeared, right? All of Aleppo had never fallen in the first, the 2011 to 2019. They always kept control of half of it, and then with Russian assistance and Hezbollah and Iran, they took back the other half. Hama had never fallen. Deir ez-Zor had never fallen. The Kurds, the U.S.-backed Kurds, taking advantage, opportunistically taking advantage of the chaos, they walked into Deir ez-Zor and took it over in the east. That had never fallen. Deir ez-Zor held valiantly amidst a sea of ISIS all through the first phase of the civil war. It was a fortress. But it has become clear that with the hollowing out of the Syrian economy and probably a lot of that Syrian military that had that experience, that had been trained and worked with the Russians and the Iranians, they were no longer in the military to a very significant degree. They had been cashiered out. They had been removed from positions of power. And the new contingent was ultimately corrupted. They were bought out. We can imagine how these conversations look. It's all going to fall apart. We can get you and your family out, settle you in a third country with a new identity. All you have to do is blah, blah, blah. And now there is so much evidence of this, right? The Syrian army, that did fight, like the Tiger forces and the 4th Division, they're complaining about being ordered by generals to retreat and retreat and retreat. That made no sense. In fact, they stopped listening. They were fighting along with the Russians in the outskirts of Aleppo and then further south to Hama. Russian soldiers have made videos of entire fields where Syrian troops had stripped off their uniforms, put on civilian clothes, dropped their weapons, left their tanks, their armored vehicles, their howitzers, everything, just entire fields of it, right? This isn't troops not wanting to fight and fleeing trenches in the middle of the night, right? This is organized. They were ordered en masse to take off your uniforms, throw down your weapons, disperse, and go home. That is what they were ordered. There are videos of thousands of such Syrian soldiers, dispersed of their equipment, their weapons, and their camouflage, walking into Iraq, just defecting into Iraq. Entire airport full of such uniforms, and videos of the Russian soldiers cursing these Syrian Arab army, traitors. as they saw it, in the most vile and colorful of Russian mot swearing, which is an art form. The mot is something that I am not fluent in. It is a cultural thing in Russia, but I guarantee you that no country swears in as colorful and vile terms as make an art out of it as Russians do. And they were just heaping contempt and on these Syrian soldiers for selling out their country, for being too cowardice to fight or being bought out, and so forth. There's numerous videos of this online, so it's pretty much indisputable. So, and this is something that has happened previously, actually. If you take a look at the Iraq War in 2003, there was also very little fighting, right? Most of the Iraqi military stood down. They had a very large military on paper, and very little of it actually fought. And this actually happened in Libya at the end, when the commander in charge of defense of the capital at the end just told his troops to stand down and opened up the gates, right? And so this is a proven track record of a kind of, if you wanted to call it, a covert warfare, an unconventional warfare, or hybrid warfare. But the jihadis of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that stormed through the country actually did very little fighting, very little. The Syrian army just disappeared. It dispersed, and it was ordered by its own generals and officers and political administrators to stand down. So this was really more a regime change operation than it was a military end to the conflict in Syria. And now we have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham supposedly in charge of Syria. The Western mainstream media, in the most vile and obscene whitewashing and apologism, has started trying to present Julani and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as some type of woke Al-Qaeda, some diversity-friendly jihadists. It's just absolutely pathetic. And, you know, we're already seeing the videos, dozens and dozens of them, of the torture, the killing of Syria's first of their former military and government officials, but also of their minorities. They're actively hunting and clearing areas of Alawites and Shia, and the Christians are also coming under severe persecution. And the new transitional government, the constitution and the parliament have been suspended, and there is a new transitional government. How diverse is it? It is so diverse that every single member is a member, not just of the Jihadi Malu, but specifically of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Not even any other groups are included in it. And they're all men, of course. I mean, there's no transsexual jihadists or no women or no feminists, nothing. And just the new justice minister of Syria has proclaimed Sharia law. All of this is being, and these videos, videos of the torture of bodies of Alawites being driven, the corpses being pulled behind trucks, and the summary executions and everything, completely ignored by the Western media. It's not happening. It's see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. But the evidence is overwhelming, both by word of the Syrian minorities when they can get word out, about what's going on. And all these videos, they're made by the jihadists themselves and uploaded, right? I mean, they're not hiding this. They're proud of this. It's just you aren't seeing it unless you're actively following it on social media, on the alternate media, because the Western mainstream media will not cover it at all, right? They're completely whitewashing and ignoring what is going on because they won, as far as they're concerned. So, I mean, the biggest tragedy here, of course, is for the Syrian people, at least for the non-Sunni Islamists in Syria, certainly the ethnic and religious minorities of the country. There's several Druze villages in the south that are now begging Israel to annex them so that they don't have to live under Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That's how bad it is right now. And it's these jihadi groups, even under Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Idlib, they were always at each other's throats, fighting for rents, sources of income and power. It's almost certain that these forces and the forces of the Syrian National Army and whatever Syrian a Turkish and U.S. sponsored council has tried to inject in to take control of a political process. There's going to be fighting. There's going to be fighting amongst them, and fighting between the Islamists and the jihadis and the Kurds. And the Israelis are now taking their piece as well. They've launched, I think, over 1,000 airstrikes now at military equipment in Syria, air defenses, the Navy. The entire Syrian Navy was destroyed in port. It looks like, I'm a former Navy guy, so that's kind of a gut punch to me to see it. It's just awful. It looks like Pearl Harbor, right? That's what it looks like. And so everything, all the air defenses, everything is destroyed. And I have to say that Russia, now, the tectonic earthquake of geopolitical orientation has just happened, right? Turkey won. Al-Qaeda won. The U.S., certainly to a degree won, although they're going to have to manage, the aftermath with Erdogan in Turkey. Israel won. Russia, Iran, the Syrian people, they all lost big, right? Russia had been heralded as being back in the Middle East, restored influence, respect from the Gulf states for strength, loyalty, and strength. That's gonna, I predict countries that like Saudi Arabia and the UAE that started getting very close to Russia will probably be taking a step back. They'll probably be saying, well, you don't have as much influence as you did for the last few years, right? You're not as strong as you were. Why should we, rally with you? Look what the U.S. and Turkey reached out and snatched that from you while you were, busy in Ukraine. So huge loss of influence and prestige for Russia. Right now, they retain their military bases, almost certainly under Erdogan's direct orders. Erdogan may actually want the Russians to stay there as kind of a hedge against the Americans and the Israelis, but I'm not so sure that the Russians want to stay in a Salafist state, right? Russia doesn't do Salafist, so we'll see. But still, even if they keep those bases, it's still going to be a huge blow to Russia's prestige and reputation and so forth. All the money and the lives that were lost, to stabilize the Syrian government, all gone overnight. Iran, huge loss of influence. The axis of resistance, I don't believe they're destroyed, but they are certainly crippled. The supply lines to Hezbollah will now have to be, completely rerouted, and they'll really have to be creative. So that's going to reduce further pressure on Israel. The Palestinians probably don't realize it yet, but they are, again, one of the biggest losers of this, because without Hezbollah and even just the presence of Syria, there will be even less restraint on Netanyahu for his final solution to the Palestinian problem, not just in Gaza, but probably the West Bank as well. We've been increasingly hearing more about that. And if the Islamists in Hamas they're celebrating the fall of Assad. If they're too stupid to understand that, they're going to find out in very, very short order of time that their celebration on religious political grounds, they're now going to be dealt with even harsher and more completely with even less objection or opposition by Netanyahu. So, and Iran is now in the targets, right, directly, because everyone is saying, look, if Syria fell that fast, well, then we can do the same thing to Iran, right? Because Iran has already been thoroughly penetrated by Israeli intelligence, right? They assassinated the political leader of Hamas in Tehran at the inauguration of Pezeshkian, of the new Iranian president. They routinely assassinate nuclear scientists, political figures, IRGC commanders. They do sabotage against Iranian gas pipelines. They have networks of separatists in Baluchistan, the Baluchi area, the Azeri ethnic area. They've got the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, waiting in Albania, just waiting to be put back into action by the U.S. Trump has already made clear that he wants to restore and heighten maximum pressure economically on Iran. They want to strangle Iran like they did with Syria, with sanctions, and then the regime change operations will start in short order from that. And Israel has even been in the last 24 hours. Well, by the time you're watching this, Israel may have struck Iran's nuclear facilities, right? Their nuclear power plants and such, because they're openly talking about it. They said there's no Syrian air defense anymore. We have a clear flight plan all the way over Syrian territory to hit whatever we want now. We'll take advantage of the opportunity. And they're openly saying this. Now, that's really interesting because Iran has now demonstrated a unquestionable and perhaps superior long-range strike capability of their own with missiles and drones. If Israel hits Iranian nuclear power plants and facilities, what's to stop Iran from striking back and wiping out Dimona nuclear power plant, where Israel makes nuclear weapons and the like? I don't know. I'm kind of interesting to see what kind of can of worms that Israel might open here. They're celebrating and they're in a moment of glee and feeling empowered, but I don't know about that. We'll see the way things work out there. But I mean, it's a huge geopolitical shift almost overnight in the Middle East, and almost certainly it's going to lead to Russia withdrawing their geopolitical horizon from the Middle East. Why waste the money and when it can all be washed away in the sands of the Middle East, everything built on foundations of sand? They will double down and refocus efforts on Ukraine, which many Russian political voices have been, why are we, even back in 2015, why are we intervening in Ukraine? Why are we not in Syria? Why are we not intervening in Ukraine? So they'll double down and focus and stay on target to the conflict that they actually are winning. But ultimately, Russia was on the ground fighting, and they had Wagner incoming. They were sending new air contingents. They were ready to fight for Syria. Iran was ready. They were going to send the Iraqi Popular Mobilization units in. They offered to send their own military in. Hezbollah was relocating forces. Everyone was willing to fight except for most of the Syrian Arab Army. And if the Syrian Arab Army sold out, not everyone, not the Tiger forces, not the 4th Division, but too many others, then there's nothing that Russia and Iran and Hezbollah could do. There's nothing. And so covertly, through a combination of the hollowing out of the Syrian economy with sanctions and occupation, and this covert action of subversion and co-option, it happened like that. There just wasn't even time to react. So the empire struck back. If you want to consider that, the U.S. hegemony, the empire of the U.S., if you want to consider that the Neo-Ottoman Empire of Recep Erdogan, take your pick there. The tea leaves, maybe become more clear who the big, winner between the two of them, how involved the U.S. was in all of this, or whether they were just a tangential player. But Russia and Iran took this one on the chin, and it's the Syrian people and the Palestinian people that will ultimately, of course, pay the real price. Russia and to a lesser extent, Iran can walk away from this, right? They took a blow. They're going to lose influence. There's going to be a lot of questions asked, a lot of blame storming. But ultimately, it is not a vital Russian interest. An important one, but not a vital one. And actually, I've heard someone, I can't remember who off the top of my head, but someone referenced a song that perfectly summed up where Russia is right now with Syria. And this is the old American Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler. So about a game of poker and being instructed, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. You never count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. And to a very large extent, Russia has now been dealt out of Syria. And that doesn't mean the conflict is over. Now between Turkey and the U.S. and the Kurds and Al-Qaeda, which we'll see how long Al-Qaeda stays loyal to, and the other jihadists stay loyal to Erdogan or to each other. The Israelis sticking in. The Arabs may decide that they don't like Turkey being such a big influence in the Arab world again, and they may start funding opposition there to whatever Turkey is trying to set up as well. But unfortunately, it's almost certainly that Syria is now a failed state, like Libya, like Iraq was for more than a decade, and still largely is to a significant degree. And I think it will ultimately, there's not going to be any peace, not even a Sharia peace for the Syrian people, unfortunately. I expect there's going to be a huge wave of attempted refugees out, just as Europe is closing the borders to Syrian refugees, which is just obscene. Al-Qaeda just took over the country, and they're saying no more refugees. Yeah, you're stuck there. It's vile. I mean, I'm saying this, I'm using a black sense of humor to mock the European Western position in all of this. But it is a very real and bloody terror and tragedy for the ethnic and religious minorities of Syria. And that is not something that really should be made light of, whatever the context. So I'm thoroughly depressed. I'm thoroughly depressed, shocked, horrified. I took my eye off this one and didn't understand what in a bad situation the Syrian government and the Syrian military were in. And I think Russia and Iran saw the offensive coming, but I also think their intelligence failed to understand the amount of infiltration, the amount of subversion and co-option of the Syrian military and parts of the government as well. I don't think they understood that because they would have done something before. And it all happened so fast, there wasn't time to react to it.